Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the University of Adelaide's Elder Hall for our latest event in our Make History speaker series, Women in the House. My name is Jess Gallagher, and I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor External Engagement here at the University of Adelaide, and it gives me enormous pleasure to be your MC this evening. To officially start the proceedings, I would like to introduce Auntie Rosalind Coleman, a proud Kaurna and Narungga woman, to perform an official welcome to country.
Well, thank you very much. I always find it an honour and a privilege to be able to come anywhere on Kaurna country and to welcome you. I look at it as just sharing a little bit about my culture and about some of the significant areas here for the Kaurna people. Mani na putni nakana minya, na mani na Nari Rosalind Coleman, mara wichinanga Kaurna mi enyana, na wangari mani na putni Kaurna yurtana, Nachu Yungugata Yakanandaya. What I just said is that it's great that you've all come here this evening. The land that we meet on today is the land of the Kaurna people, and I would like to pay my respect to my elders past, present, and those emerging. I also want to acknowledge your elders, because we know without our elders we wouldn't be the person that we are today. I want to also acknowledge my elders, those that have fought the hard battles in keeping our culture alive and strong today, as we build upon their legacy today and in the future. I know that their fight and their struggle, their wisdom and resilience, we wouldn't be the women that we are today. Like I said, my name is Rosalind Coleman. I'm a proud Kaurna and Narungga woman with historical bloodline connection to Kaurna country and also to the Narungga country. I am the inheritor of 60,000 plus years of Kaurna wisdom from my ancestor Nellie Ramajari and my parents Stanford and Nellie Wanganeen. So good evening. Welcome to our beautiful Kaurna land. Kaurna Miyana are the Aboriginal people of the Adelaide region. Kaurna Miyana Yota, the Kaurna people's traditional and tribal land or country. I also want to acknowledge the Kaurna people as the protectors and the caregivers of the Adelaide Plains region, and that their cultural and heritage beliefs are spiritually connected and important to the living Kaurna people today. I also want to acknowledge those that have come before us, who have opened the doors and continually fought the hard battles in keeping our culture alive and strong. Some may know, some may not know, but our land is the home of the great red kangaroo, Tanda. As we all know that the kangaroo never moves backwards, it always moves forward. And for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, we want to continually move forward. But people have migrated to these beautiful shores that we call Australia today. I would like to recognise, acknowledge, and embrace the true history of this country, a history which dates back thousands of generations. The very footprint on this country were those belonging to the First Nations people, who are the traditional owners and are thankful for the community that we all work, we share, and we live together now. I also want to acknowledge the cultural authority of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people throughout this country, and non-Aboriginal people that are visiting or attending this special gathering from other areas of South Australia, maybe even from Australia, that is present with us this evening. I know that this gathering is very special, an important event, and welcome you all here this evening to the Women in the House. How deadly is that? Women in the House. In acknowledging the 130th year of women's right to vote in South Australia. That's why you are all here this evening, sharing, listening to the stories of strong, passionate women in leadership within the political area, as well as listening to the esteemed panel and strong, passionate and courageous female politicians leaders discussing women, suffrage, and the state of democracy in modern Australia. Women in leadership provides individuals in the political stage and the public sector the opportunity to forge meaningful connection with fellow leaders across the nation and dive deep into dynamics, discussions that blend practical guidance as we celebrate the rich diversity that unites our women leaders and teams, and to become a driving force in your home, community and workplace. This event isn't just about inspiration, it's about empowerment, an unmissable opportunity to gain valuable advice to chart your own course to success. I have seen and felt the struggle of my people, especially my women. My story, and for many Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander women, our stories is about family, community, culture, language and connection. Our identity and survival and resilience is who we are, and we speak of the loss, love, sorrow, solidarity, resilience, pride and passion. It's the voice of our mothers that echoes in the hearts of their generations. Our voice that now advocates on behalf of women. That's what our mothers fought for and has continued for generations. Their legacy has and will continue. We have stood on the shoulders of giants, and they are our champions, who has championed change with boldness, courage, passion, and the fire within. And we as women need to continue to honour the work of our mothers that has started. The bonus mantra: I know that the greatest goddess was once the wounded woman. And for the women in my life that has taught and guided me, has known pain, and through it they have found strength, just like we all can. So our mothers, grandmothers, aunties and sisters, they take all their battle scars and wear them with pride, because they are all survivors. We are all survivors. But we aren't alone on this journey. We are tracking together with the guidance, leadership of those that are in authority, with leadership within the political space, our organisation, and those that are here with us today in finding our way and making change. Myself and you also that are present here have been backed and entrusted to shape, guide and lead this journey. These words are designed to turn into action that will achieve real and great results with successful outcomes that will deliver on changing lives, not just for our young girls, but women within our community and our society. Our desire, your desire here this evening, is to honour this in the best way that you know how, and that is to remain focused, understand, listen, and continue to evolve and make change for the betterment of our community and those that are in leadership within our community, which you all work in, and to always remain true to the intention and ensure that no meaning is lost, to have a desire and an energy to move forward today and into the future. No challenge too tall to face, no future too small to expand. May the beats of many hearts create a beautiful symphony in tune and rhythm with each other as we come and we work together. That justice rolls like the waves of the ocean that surround these beautiful lands of our beautiful country called Australia. From north to east, to south to west, from coast to forest, to desert to city, we are all tuning in together on country. It is the very essence of who we are, our identity and connection to country. May our footprints on these ancient lands of the Kaurna country and other nations remind us of creation and connectedness in our search to truth-telling. May the gum tree, from its roots to its branches, remind us to dig deep and reach high in our call for love, peace, justice, equality, and community. It is the very essence of who we are. In closing, in life we will experience many things. It will either give us great memories or will really give us great lessons. For me, I have experienced both. We will experience emotions, challenges, obstacles, etc., but it's how we deal with it that counts. I have no excuse big enough that will keep me from moving forward, and I know you'd all be the same. I have the fire in my belly, and I will continue pursuing the dreams of my community. I am living my passion, and I am shining my light, and I will continue to speak my truth. But let me encourage you with these words. You have been positioned with a purpose. Plan to follow your dream, to live in your passion, and to stand in your purpose. We are all on a journey, and we have the opportunity to share our ultimate gift to inspire, encourage, and to motivate others. You've been called to do something bigger than yourself and something greater, and that's a powerful thing. You need to surrender to your greatness, your gift and your calling. We are a generation with great potential that will move you to bigger and better things. May I encourage you to live life and embrace life. Be courageous, adventurous, challenge yourself, as it will only make you stronger. When you run away from fear, you also run away from the opportunity to be your best possible self. Live your life with integrity. Follow your passion and stay true to yourself. Never follow someone else's path. Make or create your own. Inspiration is a face that smiles back in the face of a challenge. An inspired woman needs no guidance because her calling and direction comes from the highest and purest source possible. Let me say, inspiration without integrity is dangerous. Always lead with integrity. Stay strong and work together now more than ever. Now more than ever, women must support women and not only allow their voices to be heard, but to amplify the message they share, to inspire others to do the same. To stand strong in the face of adversity. You see, I had to figure out how to create opportunities for myself. And if there's one thing that I've learned and know for sure, sometimes you've got to live it before you can teach it. A wise old elder once said to me a long time ago, he says, Ros, your worst day emotionally is a great day for your soul. He says, trust your inner spirit. It knows the way and it will direct your path as you lead your community. Let us all walk in unity and solidarity together now more than ever. Have a great evening, and you're going to hear some wonderful speeches and stories. Natalia, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Auntie Rosalind, for that generous welcome to country, for sharing your story and for reminding us of the powerful role that our mothers, aunties and sisters have played for thousands of years, but also for your well wishes and optimism for the generations that come. I'd like to acknowledge our distinguished guests here this evening, representing the Premier of South Australia, the Honourable Peter Malinauskas MP, the Honourable Katrine Hilliard MP, Minister for Child Protection, for Women and the Prevention of Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence, and for Recreation, Sport and Racing. Senator the Honourable Penny Wong, Minister for Foreign Affairs, the Honourable Connie Bonaris MLC, Member for Legislative Council, the Honourable Laura Henderson MLC, Member of the Legislative Council, Senator Sarah Hanson-Young, Senator for South Australia, the Honourable Vicky Chapman, former Deputy Premier and Attorney General, the Honourable Anne Levy AO, former President of the South Australian Legislative Council, Ms Natasha Stott-Despoja AO, former Senator for South Australia and current Royal Commissioner into Domestic, Family and Sexual Violence, the Honourable Catherine A.C. Essie, our Chancellor, Professor John Williams AM, Acting Vice-Chancellor and President of University of Adelaide, members of the University Council, colleagues, friends of the University of Adelaide. Welcome. This is going to be a very special evening and we're pleased that you're all able to join us. A couple of points of housekeeping. Please follow the signs or speak to our events staff for direction to access to facilities. And in the unlikely event that we need to evacuate the building, don't look for me, I'm useless. Please follow the directions of our staff. As you will no doubt be aware, this year the University of Adelaide is celebrating its 150th anniversary. We are the third oldest university in the country. And as part of these celebrations, we've hosted a range of speaking events. Tonight, our focus is on the female right to vote and participation in Australian politics. 2024 marks 130 years since the passing of the constitutional amendment, Adult Suffrage Act in 1894. That act saw South Australia lead the nation and most of the world in granting the right for women to vote and stand for Parliament. This is certainly something worth celebrating. To reflect on this moment as it coincides with our 150th anniversary, we thought that it would be fitting to bring together some of our many politically diverse and highly successful female alumni to discuss the history, current state and future of women in Australian politics. It is worth noting that in our state parliament, women hold key positions in cabinet and leadership roles, but equal representation remains elusive and we are not yet to have a female premier. Tonight, you will hear from 4 exceptional women who have made significant contributions in this field. We have asked them to reflect on the history of women in Australian politics, to share their unique experiences, discuss the impact that women have in politics today, and to explore the road to greater professional and political equity in the future. I'm sure we're in for a really insightful discussion. But first, I would like to introduce another exceptional South Australian female leader, our Chancellor, the Honourable Catherine Branson ACSE, to share her views and to reflect on the ways that the University continues to play an important role in this debate. Please welcome our Chancellor.
Thank you, Jess, and thank you, Auntie Ros, for your warm and inspiring welcome to country. Could I offer a special welcome to you and all other Kaurna and First Nations people with us tonight. I think I won't repeat, but let me adopt the acknowledgements that Jess offered. I think not useful for me to go through them all again. All of you are particularly welcome, and I'm sure you'll have a wonderful night. It is a great privilege to hear from some of our wonderful female graduates tonight. When our first female graduate graduated with a bachelor degree in 1885, she simultaneously became the very first person in Australia to gain a degree in science. Her name was Edith Emily Dornwall. At that time, she did not have the right to vote. She would have had to wait almost another decade before she could stand as an equal with her male friends and others in a ballot box to vote for the members of the Australian or the state parliaments. She was the first of very many glass ceiling smashing women to graduate from this university, the University of Adelaide. 4 others of that character are with us on our panel tonight, and the 5th is our facilitator. They are some of the leading names on an honour roll of extraordinary female graduates of this university. Others include, of course, the Honourable Julia Gillard AC, the first female Prime Minister of Australia. Let me interpolate that I was privileged, along with others here, to be at the play Julia, presented just the other night, and it was wonderful to have our former Prime Minister with us for that performance. It has, sadly, for those of you who have missed it, recently finished its time in the Dunstan Playhouse. It was a work that explored Julia's life as a history maker and centred on her famous misogyny speech, which I'm sure everyone remembers well, a speech which gained resonance not only in Australia, but all around the world. But as our Provost mentioned just a little while ago, there's an aspect which I felt was touched on more gently in that play than perhaps it could have been. It was, of course, implicit in the misogyny that was given consideration in the play, but I think it's worth thinking perhaps more carefully about the misogyny that women who hold high office in our country face, and particularly those who hold elected office. It's not just related to the double burden which they virtually all carry of trying to balance domestic with public responsibilities, but there is something, I think, much more prurient, much more unpleasant about much of the public commentary which they are forced to endure, which no male politicians in anything like the same degree are asked to bear. Questioned about their private lives, including their private sexual lives, a degree of impertinence, if I may put it that way, from those who question them, based almost certainly in an ingrained sense of disrespect for women, which we continue to struggle to get rid of in our country. But let me go back. Let me go back to the honour roll of women of whom this university is so proud. Another is, of course, Dame Roma Mitchell, AC, QC, former governor of our state, the first woman in Australia to be appointed to a vice-regal role, the first female Queen's Counsel in our country, and the first female Chancellor of an Australian university, and we're proud that that was our university. Let me mention also Her Excellency the Honourable Frances Adamson AC, a distinguished career in public service before she became the wonderful Governor of our state that she now is. The Honourable Anne Levy, who is with us, the first and only woman to be President of the South Australian Legislative Council. Miss Olivia Savas MP, the youngest woman elected to the South Australian House of Assembly. And I know it's invidious to make choices, but let me mention also the recently elected Chief Minister of the Northern Territory, Leah Finocchiaro, the youngest elected member, the youngest minister, and the first female Country Liberal Party Chief Minister in the Northern Territory. I could go on, the list is long, but let me say, we propose to make it longer. It's not yet long enough. It's a proud part of our 150th anniversary celebrations, and as part of this event, that we can celebrate being the first university in Australia to admit women to all degrees on an equal basis to men, something of which this university is immensely proud. We have, since the very beginning, aimed to lead. Our ambitions for advancing gender equity have taken many forms, including quite recently the introduction of our Pathway to Politics for Women program. The goals of this program are noble, to change the face of politics, and the University of Adelaide embraces that aim fully. Our first cohort from this program graduated this year. Others are now following in their footsteps, and I trust many more will follow in the future. It is our hope that in time, these new female graduates will feature among the list of political leaders, groundbreakers and fearless trailblazers that the University of Adelaide has educated over the past 150 years. Senator the Honourable Dr. Penny Wong, Senator Sarah Hanson-Young, the Honourable Vicky Chapman, and the former Senator Dr. Natasha Stott-Despoja, AO, were, when they started here, really just recent school leavers, Penny, Sarah, Vicky and Natasha, and they came onto our campus as young people with a vision. How far they have come since that time, and how proud we are of all they've achieved since then. I thank them for so generously giving up their time to join us tonight, to share their experience and their wisdom with us. My thanks to you all.
Thank you, Chancellor. I would now like to invite our facilitator for tonight's panel to join us on stage. Tori Shepherd is one of our well-respected alumna and a strong voice in the world of politics. Tori is a senior journalist at Guardian Australia. Before that, at our local newspaper, The Advertiser, she was an opinion writer, political editor and state editor. Tori has written for a range of publications and hosted many podcasts. She appears on various television and radio shows and is the author of On Freedom. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Tori Shepherd. Over to you, Tori.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Auntie Roz. Thanks, Jess. Thanks, Catherine. I'm going to call the panel up now. You know who they all are. I'm just going to call them up by their first names, and then we're going to have a little bit of a get-to-know-you session. Penny Wong, you're first up. Minister for Foreign Affairs. Sarah Hanson-Young, Green Senator for South Australia. Vicky Chapman, former Deputy Premier of South Australia. And Natasha Stock-Despoja, former Senator for South Australia. What a great panel. I bet everyone, because you didn't know until Monday, I think, who was going to be here. I bet everyone, when they heard, just sort of had a little quiet round of applause in their own homes. Now, Penny said, don't bother reading out any of my guff. They all know this. But, there's a couple of things here. There's a lot of portfolios, so we won't do all of that. We won't mention the CFMEU thing. I think we can leave that one out. This is important. On the 6th of March 2024, Penny became the longest-serving female cabinet minister in the history of the Australian Parliament. And she graduated with a Bachelor of Laws and Bachelor of Arts from the University of Adelaide. But I was reading that you were thinking about medicine and then discovered that you have a blood phobia.
Yeah. So I did maths, physics, chem at school.
Oh, that's so you.
Well, no, it's actually what good Chinese daughters do. And got into medicine here in Adelaide. Then deferred for a year, went on a student exchange to Brazil. And while I was over there, I did some work in the woman with whom I was sharing did a lot of work for the church, so she did work in hospitals, etc. And I was like, I really don't like the sight of blood. That's a problem. So I thought, I better not do medicine. So I came back, and I didn't want to do law because it seemed, I don't know, a bit conservative. See, the doctor thing I was going to do, Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, and so that sort of looked like an interesting life, and law didn't at the time. Sorry, John. Then so I did a couple of years of arts, and then I thought, well, I finish next year, and I don't think I'm ready to leave uni, so I would do law. So anyway, we are where we are now.
And you've ended up where you are, for which we are all extremely grateful. Now, Sarah Hanson-Young, you were the youngest woman to be elected to federal parliament, youngest person, but you took that baton from Natasha down the end.
A smooth transition, wasn't it?
Smooth transition. A little relay pass. You've written a book on Guard about breaking the silence on women's treatment in modern Australian politics. We can maybe talk about whether that silence has been broken and whether the problem has been fixed a little bit later. And you studied social sciences. Can you tell us a little bit more about your time here at university?
Well, I was the rat bag when I was here at Adelaide.
I'm so surprised.
I was thinking actually when we walked into the building over here where the Vice-Chancellor's office was, how many times I picketed out the front as part of the student union and association. So yeah, I was very active on campus at the time. But I must say, I loved this university. I still love this university. It gave me, I grew up in the country. So I'm a country kid, and coming to this university where there was an instant community and people to connect with from all walks of life, it gave me a true understanding of why I wanted to do things like social sciences, why I wanted to go to university. It wasn't just to get a degree; it was actually to learn more about people and and be with people, and that's what this university offered.
I also studied anthropology, which I always thought was quite useful in politics.
Yes, I think I might be the only trained anthropology in the Australian Parliament. You know, I only say that because I love it when Barnaby Joyce says he's the only accountant, and I'm like, ooh. That's his skill base, apparently.
Now, Vicky, first female president of the South Australian Liberal Party, deputy leader of the opposition a couple of times. And you have come back to university recently. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes, well, I was first here 50 years ago, and then to do law, and then a short time with a competitor, I won't mention their name, for a stint, and then 3 years ago I came back here to do space law in commercial postgraduate work, which I loved, and to me it's a whole new world. But yes, early days, law for me was a bit unknown, a bit like growing up in the country. You don't have exposure to all of the advantages and options that are available to people in study and things. But you know, South Australia is a state that has a history of education for girls and pioneered in it about the time of this university getting started. So I think it's really important that you know, I had that exposure. But we in the country had Rundle Street farmers, we used to call them. They'd come over and have a little, you know, weekend, light the log fire, look at their sheep. And my brother and I were sent over to look at their sheep and explain to them which end they had to crutch and things like that. And one of them, leading Adelaide lawyer, who I won't mention his name, is now deceased, of course, but he had said, when he's looking out over this sort of mob of sheep, he said, you know, we're going to have a fine crop of lambs. And I thought, well, you know, if lawyers think that they're going to get lambs out of a mob of wethers, then any fool could be a lawyer. So that was it for me. I took an interest, and yeah, here I was.
Now, I read something else about you and your country background, which you can comment on or not, which was that you made a bit of a crust while you were at uni, buying and selling pigs, but also making and selling bikinis and bridesmaids' dresses.
Yeah, well, that's true. Bikinis were big in those days in crochet, little triangles, you know. I made a fortune out of those.
Bikini.
Very low amount of equipment, you know, very easy, high value added. Bridesmaid dresses are a bit more difficult to make money on, but usually because the girls got fatter and slimmer and, you know, it was a pain in the neck. But crochet bikinis, yeah, if I hadn't been a lawyer, I think I would have been a good money spinner with that. Back in fashion again, 50 years later. So.
One good wave in a crochet bikini. Now, Natasha, most recently you've led the Royal Commission into Domestic Family and Sexual Violence here in South Australia. There is so much here. I'm sure most people here are aware of your work with the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, but you're also a professor in the practice of politics at the Australian National University and founding chair of RWAT. And I thought you might like to tell us a little story from your time at university involving a plastic fetus.
When you say it like that. Annabelle Crabb, who was Women's Officer at the time that I was President of the Students' Association, we have the distinction of kindly requesting, do I mention the name? Former Minister Jack Snelling closed down his O-Week stall, protesting abortion. No one was complaining about his freedom of speech or that right, but yes, there were fetuses in jars. So yes, it was not good.
No. I believe it has been written about before by another excellent alumni, Samantha Maiden. So yes, it is on the public record.
It is on the public record. But can I just echo Sarah's comments about the university? Because that sense of the holistic experience of this institution, the combination of tradition and progress, I look back and think I really did love my time here. It was the heady days of, you know, student activism with the reintroduction of tertiary fees in the form of HECS. But I look back with, you know, very fond memories.
Well, can we stick with that and with you for a second? Because I was wondering, back then when you're starting to be politically active, but you're also engaged in the world, like, how did you see gender and politics? Were you optimistic about the world, or were you wanting to change it?
Well, apart from engaging in, public rallies and demonstrations, because my mum had always made me promise, if there's an unravelling of the Whitlam legacy, you have to be out of the streets. But I did also run for student representation, along with Penny and many others. My first port of call was women on campus. So gender has always been a part of my life, growing up in the women's movement, my mum imbuing feminism from an early age. But my first real election, I don't know if people remember the tabloid version of On D. So not On D, but Bread and Circuses. Yes, it was eventually shut down with good reason. But I thought, no, I'm going to bring a feminist lens to this rather tawdry publication. And for those of you who remember the late Michael Atchison, the wonderful cartoonist, family friend, he designed these wonderful postcards, and it said, I ran with a guy called Andrew, and it was like, vote for Nat and Andy. My opposition ran with, vote for Fat and Randy, and they romped it in. So yes, I think that was my earliest experience of sort of political sledging with maybe a little sexist sort of bent to it.
Wow. Vicky, was it the Young Liberal Party that did? No. Were you entrenched in politics here at university?
Not a lot. I had been in the 70s active in political campaigns really since 1970. So that's 50 years, more than 50 years ago now. Largely because we'd had, living on an island, obviously we had elections and nobody really took much notice of Kangaroo Island, so we just did our own thing, Incidentally, we've never had posters on Kangaroo Island. We've always just agreed that we wouldn't have them. They're just a pain in the neck, waste of time putting them up and down. But I think, my father became a local member, and we had a situation where the island were under a black ban from having any product brought back and forth. There was a wool dispute. Went to Supreme Courts, etc. It was a big deal at the time. And so we had, we were active in politics, town hall meetings, these sorts of things. We were threatening to secede and just enter into trade with Asia directly. We were just doing our own thing a bit. And so our parents were in that age. So yes, there was a lot of activity there. But also, it was an era when the Whitlams came in, and I remember us going to the world premiere of Sunday Too Far Away, which was a sharing film, Australian film. Some of you might remember, not many, probably all the young ones won't remember. And Mr and Mrs Whitlam came over, and it was a huge, big, black tie function. Politics came in a kaleidoscope of different, different ways. And so, I was Dad's handbag a bit in those days. So, in fact, I can remember being on this stage once, having to sort of give out some prizes with him and having a see-through dress on.
But not a crochet bikini.
No, not a crochet bikini. I probably should have done with a few of those underneath. But so I had a very, close exposure to politics, the good and the bad. And it teaches you one thing, of course, courage under fire, and you learn that from an early lesson those days.
And Sarah, I guess you've seen it most recently from being a university student, as the youngest one here. When you were at uni, what were you thinking when you were looking at the state of politics and the position of women within? Who would have been Prime Minister?
Well, John Howard was Prime Minister. And I think I probably have to credit John Howard for my political career. Because he gave me great motivation. Great motivation. But of course, Penny was already in the Parliament and Natasha was in the Parliament. So there were women there that, were role models, and but not many, really, still. Natasha, you were the youngest by far. And I think, it was very clear to me that in the era of John Howard, if young women wanted to be more active in the issues that were impacting us, RU4H6, I was that was the end of my university, as I was kind of, that debate was really hot. I knew that we actually needed more women there. And I think, just reflecting on the culture of the university and the experiences that you could have here, that was actually helped by the fact that we had student unions and student associations that were properly funded. And John Howard deliberately wanted to dismantle that. I remember standing on this exact stage, actually, and Penny and Natasha were invited to a debate or a forum. I don't know if you remember that, Penny, but you were here. And it was a cold winter's night, and John Howard wanted to push this legislation through to VSU,
right.
voluntary student unionism, to squash the student unions. And it was very hard to get. There was certainly not as many people in this room tonight as there are tonight. And I think that was really, that was a crushing of that kind of experience. And I know universities are still doing what they can, but I do think that there was a fork in the road there. And I was very lucky to be on at the end rather than a few years later.
Indeed, and again, of course, post-pandemic, more changes again.
Absolutely, but I must say, young people and students are still leading the charge when it comes to talking about the issues that really, matter. It is young women who are taking up the mantle on the climate action, and not just here in Adelaide and around the rest of the country, but across the world. It is women who are saying we have to change the way we do things if we want this planet to survive. And they're doing it by engaging with their community, whether that's their university community or their broader community. And I think that's what women do best, actually. It's never just, oh, well, we're just going to be out in front and we've got all the answers. That's what the blokes do. Women actually engage their community in a way that is deep and real.
Now, Penny, I know so many people look up to you now. I knew you'd make that face. Who did you look up to in a political sense when you were deep in student politics? Did you have a role model?
I mean, I think you have a lot of role models through your life, don't you? I was very lucky to have a strong feminist mother who married a Chinese man when the White Australia policy was still in place, so obviously had a very, regard for rules, high regard for rules. You look to women like Susan Ryan and she changed Australia. Joan Kerner, Carmen Lawrence. When I came to Parliament, I worked with Jenny Macklin. I also had men who helped. So I think one of the things we always need to do, and maybe I'm only saying this because I'm over 50, but I hope that I used to think this as well, is that it is very important to remember where we came from and all the women of courage who've gone before. I think Ros talked about standing on the shoulders of giants, and we really do. It's important to remember that in part as an act of respect, but it's also important to remember that because it reminds us what change requires. Change requires much more than performance. It does require courage, I think someone said, courage under fire, and it requires us to change the hearts and minds of people who don't agree with us, which can be difficult. That was a very long answer, wasn't it?
It was a good one.
Reflective answer.
Yeah, but I might even ask you to keep expanding on it, if that's okay. You talked about, I guess, Susan Ryan as a change agent and moments of change, and obviously suffrage was a huge moment, or the start of a series of huge moments. We had Me Too. What does it take to turn those moments into something that forges lasting change?
That's a very good question, isn't it? I wrote an article once for a book, or wrote a short piece for a book, where I talked about the way, I said change is a bit like, when you're walking on the beach and you're not quite sure if the tide's going out or not, and then you just see something where you've got like, oh yeah, that stone or that rock, that the tide is now breaking a long way from it. So you realise in that moment, oh yeah, the tide's gone out. And I sometimes think there are moments in our political life or the life of a country, where you have a moment like that, where you see something that has happened and you think either, well, we have changed a lot, or we've changed the wrong way. And I think that for me there's been quite a lot of that lately, actually.
The wrong way?
Or both ways.
Okay.
I mean, over the last sort of period, certainly when the Chancellor did her riff then, which was unscripted, I suspect, about the way in which women in politics are treated. I mean, if you look at some of the media and the ways in which, perhaps even some of the women on this panel have been reported, it's pretty extraordinary.
Mm. Are you also concerned about some of that American... Actually, we might get to this a bit later, but...
I think so. I think the culture has been... at different times there are different dynamics which you're trying to manage. I mean, I think there has been... I've also just seen the play Julia, so there is this sort of misogynistic history that our country has had that we need to keep working on. But I think there is a different dynamic in addition to that now, which is the nature of social media, the nature of political discourse, is it has become more acceptable to be, as the Chancellor called it, impertinent. And I worry about that actually primarily as a Democrat, as in a small d Democrat, sorry Natasha, not a big D Democrat, because I think democracy does require a capacity to disagree without dehumanising each other. That's actually fundamental to a sensible debate, and I fear that in our popular culture and in our political culture we are losing some of that.
Mm. Sarah, how do you feel about you've had to fight some fights. David Leyonhjelm, was it FHM, the magazine?
It was Zoo magazine.
Sorry, Zoo, same genre.
Yeah.
Do you feel...
they don't exist anymore either, so,
Do you feel as though they're incremental changes, and do you feel as though we're in a different world now?
Sure. I think I think we've had some good changes. I don't think we can discount that. We have had some good changes, and the reason I referenced the RU4H6 debate, and Natasha was there and Penny were there. I think that was a key moment of going forward, and it's had significant impacts, real life impacts for women from there on in. In terms of how women are represented and treated, particularly in politics and leadership, I think every time there's a first, they're going to. It's always the hardest, and I think Julia Gillard was treated terribly, and what was horrible about it, actually, was it was being done in full view, and there was this kind of struggle between, do we not want to acknowledge that this is happening, or do you acknowledge it? Does that feed it? Do we, allow the first female Prime Minister to be able to, just get on with the job and, ride on through it? My own experience with some of the things that have happened in my political career is I started at the beginning thinking, don't pay attention to it, block it out, ignore it, just, it'll go away, it'll pass. But bullies don't do that. Bullies bully and intimidate because they want a reaction, is what I've learnt. So actually, I had got to a point where that it had silenced me. I was pretending so much that it wasn't happening, that it was kind of like, it was all around me. People didn't know how to talk about it, and because they didn't see me talking about it. So I had to break the silence so that actually so I could have the agency back. And I think in hindsight, we should have done that for Julia Gillard, I think, in my view. So her misogyny speech was a moment, but I don't think it was the moment that it could have been, actually. I think it could have been more than that. I think But there are moments. Her speech was a moment. When I took on Lionhelm, that was a moment. Obviously, now we think about the treatment of the most vulnerable people in politics in the building, and that is actually the staff who have no power, and young women, female staff in particular. We all know the story of what's happened to Brittany Higgins. I mean, frankly, I can't believe that a former minister is suing a rape victim who worked in her office. I think it is absolutely appalling, but, the court will decide that. So there have been really key moments, but I think, and things have improved because we're talking about it. We actually have broken a lot of that silence, and I think you have to do that. But Penny's right. There is almost this backlash going on to that as well. And so women have broken our silence, and there are some men out there who want to take that space for themselves, and so they amp up. Only last sitting week.
Yeah, I think Penny might have a very specific example.
Go. I know she does. I was trying to give her the lead in.
Yeah, okay. So I want to, if I may, make 2 points after this. But there's a senator from South Australia, and I'm now going to give him some press. His name is Alex Antic, and he has a particular view around. Well, he has lots of interesting views. But he gave a speech at the end of last year, which went to gender and gender roles. And this is how he finished it. Our society needs more, not less masculinity. I think a little more patriarchy will help us out, not hurt us at all.
A little more patriarchy. I love it.
I'm just going to say 2 things. One, I have reflected a lot on the time that Julia was Prime Minister, and whatever people's views about what she did or her policies, etc., I think separated out from that, it's undeniable that the way in which she was treated, I think, was unacceptable for anybody, and was so driven by an acceptance of quite misogynistic behaviour and comments and language. We did have specific discussions at the time when she has spoken about it, where we probably made a tactical decision which was similar to that which Sarah has described, which is you just draw attention to it and then people say you're a victim, etc., etc. Now, I think we should have called it out more, and I don't think that would have changed it.
No.
And we did it, as a collective of women, and that was very much her view. I now think we should have called it out more just to try and take it on, because it was awful. And I remember at the time, what happened in my emails, like all of a sudden, because I have, as one person said, well, well, I won't say what they said anyway. So, because I'm Asian and I'm gay and I'm a woman, right? So, which one is people going to hate you most for? And I found it really interesting when I first went into politics. The most hate stuff I got was for being Asian. But around the time of Julia's prime ministership, it switched to being female. And then the marriage equality was the gay thing. So I think got all three.
Wow, 3 epochs of hate.
But I will say this: positives. We have a very different parliament. We have a Senate where we are majority female. I am in a part of a Labor Senate caucus. We are the majority female, and our caucus is 50% overall in the parliament. We have almost 50% of women in the cabinet. We have a diverse House of Representatives, and it has made a difference. It has made a difference because the parliament looks more like the people of Australia. I think, therefore, is more responsive, and it has made a difference in terms of policy. I could go through what has happened, but just in the 2 years since we've been elected, we now have the lowest gender pay gap on record. Now, that is about women in our party and in government, but also women across the parliament doing more. And it's important to recognise that, like to try and, as much as we might have political differences, to recognise what Sarah has done, to recognise what Vicky did as Attorney General. I mean, quite extraordinary work in terms of improving the legal position of women in their state, and I respect that.
Well, that was an excellent segue. So we talked a little bit about RU 486 and a little bit about the backlash to whenever women make progress. Yes. So can I ask you, Vicky, you were instrumental in abortion law reform here in South Australia. Have you been seeing a backlash against that?
Well, sure, I've received some of that. I think it's a controversial piece of legislation. Probably the closest other in the time I was in the Parliament was in dealing with stem cell research and the harvesting of embryonic tissue, which was ultimately agreed to be legislated and allowed to be used in research, particularly embryos which under our laws, perhaps people don't understand, is that once they've been frozen 10 years, they literally have to be washed down the sink if they're not used. So there's a time frame for them. So it was very controversial and very difficult. The access to confession law in the sexual abuse inquiries did bring me into a little sort of bit of tension with some of the archbishops, but we sorted it out eventually. I think they were scared of me in the end, actually, so they were being a bit nicer. But look, I agree with Penny that there's been behaviourally in the Parliament, it's very different. Some of that I think is relevant to the gender contribution in the profile and being representative of the Australian community, but also there's been enough behaviour in the parliaments over the years to change that. Look, when I first started looking at the Parliament, when Dad was there back in the 70s, Jenny Cashmore Adamson, as she was then, was the only female in the Parliament. Then Molly Byrne had come in and gone for a short time, and there'd been two women at the end of the 50s, Joyce Steele and Jessie Cooper, and they had, these were pioneering women, no question about that, but they're largely ignored. There's an exception in the sense that Joyce Steele was a long-standing education minister, but largely they were ignored. They didn't even have a female toilet in the Parliament, even when Jenny was there in the 70s. I mean, she had to go and use the what was the old Constitution rooms next door to the Parliament. So, quite different approach. And when I first got into Parliament, I remember I had one incident. They'd usually, make some crack about what you're wearing or something, sort of attempting to be demeaning. And I found that a little bit unusual because I'd had 20 years in courtrooms where you had court cases against your own colleagues. Penny would know we're trained to have the debate, play it's the debate over the case, not playing the man as such. And your own Chancellor here was, an advocate, went on to become the first female Crown Solicitor in South Australia. But I've got a photograph of you, which at a fee I won't publish, 40 years. And I think that...
Now we all want to see it, Vicky.
Yeah. And I think that there are women, obviously, at that time where we were exposed to trivial commentary, and it was irritating as hell, but basically you had to just really keep a stoic face. That was the way I dealt with it. Initially. There was one incident early in my parliamentary career when I had been approached by a minister, and he would obviously have a bit much to drink as well, but it was in the House, and I documented the whole thing in a letter to the then Premier, and everything at 10:02 he then re-entered the chamber and said this and this, and I put the whole thing down. And I said a copy of this is going to our shadow attorney, and I had asked him for a meeting. I said, look, he's your minister, you deal with this. If I have any repeat of this behaviour, this will, go a lot further. And I just made it very clear. I think they just got a bit scared of me after that. So basically, they backed off. But I saw in that 20 years attempts again, this is across politics in the sense of demeaning commentary, which is, as I say, was foreign to a courtroom sort of situation where you go and have a cup of coffee with the person you're having a case with afterwards. But it was a very different approach. And but a few inquiries later, the expectation now is that you make a smart-ass comment like that in Parliament, you're pulled up on it, you have to apologise, and it's dealt with.
It's exposed.
And so it's exposed in the sense, but it's pulled up. That's the important thing and there is a demand for an apology. And so I think that has diminished that. What's happened on the negative side in that 20 years, of course, is the explosion of social media. So instead of being in the parliaments or even on a television camera, it's anonymously written often, and it's disgraceful, and it's penetrating, and it's permanent, and it just keeps repeating. And so it's very, very difficult. So bullies have found another avenue at this point, and obviously there's some more work to be done to how that's managed. Some of the companies are being reasonably responsible in pulling material down, but basically that's the big challenge now, to be able to regulate that.
The Advertiser did run a dissection of David Spears's clothes this morning in the paper,
Yep.
so I don't know if that's a step forward.
Well, I wasn't in a rush to go out and buy any of that.
No, me neither. Now, Natasha, I'm really interested in your take on how far we've come, but there is a question from the audience which I think fits in right now while we're with Vicky. So, this is from Jan Bowman. South Australia was the first state to give women the vote, but is now the only state or territory not to have had a female premier. What has gone wrong in SA?
Are you asking me?
Oh,
or
that's to you,
Natasha?
Vicky.
Oh,
sorry.
Look, I think it'll come. I'm the oldest here on the panel, but it'll be in my lifetime, I'm sure. And I think that is a natural progression. I still think our parliaments, particularly in South Australia, I think need to be less Anglo. I think that we've missed out on diversity in many other spheres. So I think gender's been focused on, and that's not unreasonable because we were so depleted in our sort of representation. But, sexuality, religion, culture, age, these are all things that I think do need to be worked on if we're going to reflect the community that we're representing. That's the reality of that. And so we've got a long way to go in relation to other diversity, not just gender. So, premiers, it'll come. Obviously it has in others. We mentioned Carmen Lawrence before and others. Sometimes women have been sort of dumped in the deep end to take over the sort of when the shit's hit the fan, so to speak.
The glass cliff, I think.
So we'll get a woman to come in and clean it up, and largely they do. Leah, I had a bit to do with. She's of course just become Chief Minister in the Northern Territory, and I've seen work with her in the last 10 years, and she's actually. She's got a huge task to deal with, the number of the communities there and the financial strife that they're in. So, there's quite a bit of work to be done, is really what I'm saying in that regard. And I think we do need to obviously... I was, the very morning that Julia was appointed Prime Minister, I sent her, in those days, it was an email, but, it's not a fax machine, I think we had to send it that stage. But we had, to say congratulations, and I think it is important that we do recognise when these achievements have been made.
Absolutely.
And I will say that when I became the first female Deputy Premier and female Attorney General, which I was the last picture on the board, 115 and I was on a little picture down here, I got cross-party contributions of congratulations. So I do think it is important that we do maintain that and that we do shout out against trolling behaviour on social media and still work towards some reforms that need to be done to do with that.
Natasha, what do you think the remaining barriers are? There's been a lot of talk about women not wanting to go into politics because they saw how Julia Gillard was treated, but at the same time people have said they saw Julia Gillard and realised a woman could be in that position. So are you optimistic, and how can you smooth the way?
I have to be optimistic, but it's interesting because there's a thread about the double standards which women in public life generally or specifically in politics endure, and the stereotypes to which we're subjected, and they have been going on for more than a century. So Henry Fuller, former Lord Mayor, at the time of women's suffrage, said that he didn't want women to get the vote because they'd gain half the seats of the House of Assembly, and Mary Lee, our famous, wonderful suffragist, would be Premier. Well, guess what? It didn't happen, and it still hasn't happened. So your point about South Australia, we are a paradox. This wonderful extraordinary distinction of being the first place in the world to give women the right to vote and stand for Parliament without caveats. Aboriginal women were involved in that process of lobbying for that change and were eligible to vote in that next election, even though they were discouraged from doing so. Despite that distinction, look how long it's taken. 21 years before a woman ran for office. 41 years before, Jessie Cooper and Joyce Steele were elected. So there are traditional barriers, if you're asking about, the barriers that still exist. Yes, the way that we're portrayed, the double standards to which we're subjected, the reality, as Kathy, you were saying, balancing domestic roles or paid, unpaid caring roles with opportunities to run for office. But change has happened, and I don't think any of us could be on this stage if we didn't believe that it was possible. I mean, Sarah's point about RU486, I was there when that was initially subject to ministerial discretion. The idea of an abortifacient to actually be the responsibility of the health minister as opposed to dealt with like any other drug through the TGA. So I was so proud to be there when, so the Democrat amendments, myself and Meg Lees had amendments to change this, but we withdrew them because there was a better pathway, and that was a cross-party members' bill, private members' bill sponsored by women across the spectrum. And I still think that's one of the highlights of certainly my time in the Parliament, when I saw women working together to achieve change. And Vicky, you mentioned stem cell reform. That was one where women played a leading role in the federal Parliament to bring about the change, particularly in relation to somatic cell nuclear transfer and those issues to which Vicky referred. So yes, change can take time. I jokingly always refer to my parliamentary work as being sort of a series of Pantene moments, that shampoo commercial from the 90s. Anyone with me? It won't happen overnight, but it will happen. But then there are other examples, where there is the rate and pace of change is motivated by something. So the shameful issue affecting, a young staffer, Brittany Higgins, being raped in Parliament House, in her workplace. But look, hundreds of thousands of people taking to the streets, and subsequently policy and legislation that potentially changes lives. In 1996, I remember walking down the escalators at Canberra Airport just after the election. We're all heading for the first day of the Howard Parliament. And the question I got asked was, thinking I was going to be asked, Senator, what does it feel like to be the youngest woman elected? But no. Senator, what do you think of the massacre in Port Arthur? Look at the change that inspired in political leaders and the legislation. So things can happen. There can be a great catalyst for change. But most of the time it requires eternal vigilance. And when it comes to women's representation in public, private life, wherever, eternal vigilance is necessary, because the pushing back of those with power and the patriarchy is actually really real. And right now, the backlash is incredibly real, whether it's in our wonderful home country of Australia or whether I'm seeing it through the UN across the world. It's really, really dangerous.
Just need a bit more patriarchy, eh? Can I stick with you for a second, Natasha, and ask you, I guess, a slightly more personal side of this whole thing. What do you do when you're faced with misogyny or sexism? Do you have we talked a little bit about how ignoring is no longer the option, but I often think, I'm a bit of a freezer, did somebody just say that? The moment's gone. What do you do in the moment when somebody displays those behaviours in front of you?
Well, these days always call it out. But even as a relatively young member of Parliament, I did. But I learnt quickly, and Sarah's expanded on this, that, particularly when you're in a Parliament that was 14% around that female, that my nickname quickly became, one senator would call me princess or precious princess if I called out bad behaviour. Or, of course, humorless feminists got that a lot. I thought I was quite funny, but no. But I do think this new generation, the younger women, but also men and non-binary Australians who are saying, you know what, we're not going to put up with this. So I think we've seen that wonderful change where, yes, people can call out bad behaviour. Yes, as you said, Vicky, that it sometimes, hopefully, is called to account. And we know that being a bystander is one of the single biggest, a good bystander, is one of the best things in changing gender inequality. But even though, say, I think 76% of Australians are bothered by a sexist joke, 56% would call it out. In fact, less than that a lot of the time, because we feel that our mates, our friends, our colleagues won't back us up. So until that behaviour changes, particularly among men and boys, and there's a whole raft of issues with masculinity going on in that sort of those age groups at the moment, but until we're good bystanders and call it out, it shouldn't just be up to the humorless feminists like me of the world. It's got to be done across the board, and particularly men. So if there's a joke at the pub that's outrageous, you've got to call it out, because some of us get a bit tired of having to do it.
Penny, do you ever face comments like this, or are you just, you know... I mean in person, yes. Obviously online. I was just thinking by now everyone would be way too terrified of the eyebrow.
I was reflecting on what you said, what do you do? Do you fear? I have quite a well-developed counterpunch, which sometimes is reflexive, and probably occasionally I kind of go, I wish I hadn't gone quite so hard in response to being had a go at. But it's probably why I've also survived in politics, right? But I remember when a particular Liberal senator meowed at me. Do you remember that?
Oh,
yeah.
yes.
And I went him because I actually couldn't believe it. We were in the Senate estimates, I think. I was the finance minister, I think, at the time, and I actually couldn't believe it. But I had a really fascinating conversation with that person, which I'd rather you didn't write about, Tori. Okay. Because he apologised to me, which was very decent, and I said, that's fine, I won't say anything else other than it's resolved. But I said, yeah, how do you think your daughters would feel? And he said something about not knowing how to respond to a woman like me when I reacted like that. I thought it was a really honest and really interesting insight that actually he wasn't a bad guy, he just had no map other than a very disrespectful sort of schoolboy map of how to deal with a woman who was exercising power. I thought it was quite interesting. In my more positive moments, I think that's right. Like, I think, I look back at my life and my career, and there were always jobs where there weren't very many women. So you joked about me being in the CFMU. I was a timber workers official, and I learnt a lot. That's actually where I met Sarah when she was a kid.
Yeah, that's true.
It makes me feel old when she told me that story. I'm like, oh my God, you were that kid? Regional Victoria in a timber area, wasn't it? That's right.
And sorry, Sarah, what were you doing at this point?
She was being a kid.
Yes, I was literally a kid.
I thought you were changing yourself into something.
She was a little kid.
I think I was cooking the barbecue, Penny, actually. I have photos of that.
Oh, wow. I had dark hair. Anyway, I've lost my train of thought. But I think I thought at the time I was really bolshy. And I probably had to be because there weren't any other women or very few women in those contexts where I was. But actually, I did make decisions all the time about what I took on and what I didn't. And now I look at younger women, I go, wow, they are completely fearless.
Yeah.
It's fantastic. It's not, there's zero tolerance. And I think, wow, that is one of those moments of change, eh? Those things you look at, things have changed.
Yeah, I think that's so true.
Sarah, you've taken the fight up a few times. How do you cope with the stress of that? It's a slightly different question. You live in the beautiful Adelaide Hills. Do you take a walk? How do you bring yourself down when you've had to, I guess, gird your loins and go in on the attack?
Yeah, that's a good question. The first thing I would say that in the midst of those moments, actually, when big publicity about, I've taken it on, I've called it out, actually it's when I've felt the most alone. It's a really weird thing that happens in politics, right? When you kind of, you're standing there, you're speaking your truth, it's all through the newspapers, it's all online, it's on the television, and yet you feel totally alone. Yeah. It's a really weird feeling, and it's something that I've spoken to many other women about, and particularly for young women who want to enter into politics, that you have to learn to accept that, and it's taught me to then, when I see other women in that situation, I often because people don't mean to leave you alone, right? But there's so much fanfare, there's so much chaos going on that you think, there's no way I'll call Sarah or send her a message because she'll be inundated. But then everybody thinks that. And you're kind of left there. And in those moments, my aunt, who Penny knows, a great mentor to me, and she said to me right from when I was at university, she said, you have to stand still in the wind. And that is what I remember. And so yes, I go for a walk or I go for a run. I cook. I really, actually, it's about something that I can control. I love my vegetarian pasta and I cook it. But in those moments, I'm just thinking, stand still in the wind, stand still in the wind, don't falter. And that's what's gotten me through. But then remembering that, when you do see somebody who's under fire or shown that type of courage in the public eye, don't just assume that everyone else is inundating them. If you want to say something, say it and let them know you're there. It does make a difference. It really, really does. And across party lines, as Vicky's suggesting. Could I just say one other thing? Sure. And that's, is reflecting on how the cross-party element and how women work. Penny and I are in the Senate together these days, and so often when it's quite clear that a lot of the blokes let their egos get in the way of being able to work together and deal with things. And so often, I don't know if I'm allowed to say this, Penny, but we'll be up the back of the chamber sorting it out because the boys can't get their shit together. And all we have to do, it's not very hard actually, you just have to work out what we're going to do, how we're going to fix it, and then make sure they thought of it first. Oh, God. And I don't think that's probably changed, Vicky, has it? No.
No, definitely. But can I just on Penny's point, you do need to have a prepared response for complete jerks in that situation. and I think Nat was actually in the Parliament when this happened, when Amanda Vanstone got a quip with her about her weight from some loser, sitting next to her. And she just turned to him and said, well, better to be broad in the backside than have shit for brains. And it's on the Hansard. Perfect.
Yeah. That is so. I have this ongoing plan to set up an actual course where you get trained in quick, witty comebacks. Totally. So you've got one for all occasions. Very important. Now, we are rapidly coming to the end of our little chat, so I'm going to finish up with another question from the audience and sort of tie in some of my own, because it's from Anonymous, so they don't know if I'm messing with their question. And this one was, considering the recent past history of the shameful treatment of women in Australian politics, what advice would you give young women wanting to enter this space now, brackets, putting this into the context of the current US political scene, the childless cat lady? And I did just want to add to that, we do have, as mentioned, the Pathway to Politics women here today, a fabulous group, and I've done a couple of sessions with them where I'm a bit worried that they've heard the war stories of women in politics and that it might put them off. So, Natasha, if I could start with you, what advice would you give to them, and particularly about the rewards that can be found?
Well, as a cat lady with children, I often say to young people, but young women especially, that just because you feel politics has given up on you, don't you give up on it. We need that diversity and difference reflected and represented that everyone's talked about tonight. I think that one of the things I grappled with at first when I was, the youngest woman to enter and get elected and all that, was this notion that your experience, by virtue of your age, so your experience was not as relevant, that you didn't know as much, that somehow my experiences were less valid than a man who might be in his 50s, 60s, lived a privileged life, had never done anything, So please don't give up on politics. I know, I see those surveys. I remember we were talking about, as you mentioned, after the Julia Gillard horrendous treatment, Plan International did a survey that showed 1% of young women would consider a political career. So absolutely go for it, because I learnt early that you could change lives for the better. In my day, with the stroke of a pen, these days, tap of a keyboard. So it is possible to be a part of that change. I guess one gratuitous piece of advice I'd give is networks. Support networks are important for all the reasons that Sarah's just outlined, but also you need to have people around you who will test and challenge you as well, but also be a support when things are difficult. And I guess the other thing I've always felt strongly about, if women support other women, particularly across the spectrum, then some of the behaviours we've seen and the stereotypes that we've been subjected to will hopefully change.
Special place in hell. Thank you, Natasha. And Vicky, what would you say to these young women considering a life in politics?
Well, definitely go for it. Look, I think the other thing to understand is that, sure, there are difficulties, and we talk about this sort of courage under fire when you're dealing with various instances, and sometimes it's difficult to make decisions, but you have to be courageous, you have to be prepared to make decisions. Parliamentary life is, a bit of a question time's a bit of chaos, but the rest of the time is generally fairly orderly. And it is important to reflect on how instrumental you can be in reform, as Nat has said. So I think that's important. But the government is another whole different job, almost, isn't it? I think many others who have been in government will understand the distinction here. It is another level, and it's a different job, and sometimes it overlaps a bit with the parliament, but largely they're two different jobs. And so there's skills in each, I think. But yes, be courageous, be prepared to make decisions, and understand that you're in a career, unlike many others, which is highly competitive. Lots of people want your job, and if you get elected, you need to reaffirm to yourself that you have been successful at that, and they have appointed you, and you're entitled to be where anyone else wants to be. And so have that courage in yourself. Obviously, setting up networks to give you that reinforcement of support is very helpful, whether that's a mentor, colleague situation or family, because they become very important in giving you that support and nourishment to give you the strength to go out there and fight every day for what you're doing. And that you're paid to do a job, but it becomes a passion. And I think we all have aspirations about what we want to achieve in public life, and it's important that we surround ourselves and be in a support situation so that you can achieve that. And then get out and let the next one come in.
Very, very sound advice, Vicky. Sarah?
Well, I'd say stand still in the wind. Have courage. Know what it is that you act. What's your core? I think that's really important because, as Vicky said, you have to be prepared to make decisions, and you have to have some base by which you make those decisions and feel okay about it. Whether it's having that argument or that discussion inside your own party room, inside your branch, or then therefore in the chamber. So know why it is that you believe what you believe. But also, I think the key thing is to listen. I really do. I think the best politicians, the ones who make it the longest, are those who actually can listen and listen to other people's views and work out, where you can find that common connection or the compromise, or just agree to disagree, but at least knowing that. And you only know that if you actually can hear people.
Thank you. Penny Wong, bring it home.
So I had 3 points. The first is, I think we all seek a life with purpose, right? And so part of what you do, as certainly when you're younger, but throughout your life, is to try and understand what is the purpose I want to work towards. How do I do that? And when it comes to politics, I would say you can make a decision not to be interested, but you can't make a decision not to be affected. So to my way of thinking, therefore, I had to work in it. Secondly, I always say find your own voice. What does that mean? I think it means you do you, you be... I am how I am. I'm not very funny. I'm very serious. Sarah does her thing.
Who's saying that is actually sort of funny for some reason.
No, Nat does her thing. Do you know what I see? I think you have to be you, and that goes to authenticity as well as to a certain degree of integrity, I think. But the final thing is, I think politics is often harder than you think it will be. But there are also moments which are extraordinary, both in government or in as a politician, where you are part of something that is bigger than you, where you give effect with others to something that is bigger than you, or where you speak for others in a way that you feel like you are speaking with the power of all those who are with you. And those moments are extraordinary, and they matter. Thank you very much.
And that brings us to the end.
I've never wished an event could go longer than this evening. Absolutely incredible. Thank you so much, Tori, for leading that lively discussion. And to Penny, Sarah, Vicky and Natasha, thank you for all that you have done. I know this room is going to leave this evening with a renewed sense of hope and optimism, and we are so grateful for your insights, but importantly, all that you have done to shape and to mould and to progress our society. So thank you so much to all of you. Thank you. I'd now like to invite two members of the 2024 Pathway to Politics for Women program to deliver a vote of thanks and present gifts to our panellists. Rebecca Hanna is a PhD student studying at the University of Adelaide who is passionate about equity and innovation in health. Niloufar Malikia graduated from the university in 2019 and is currently a medical practitioner. Both are looking at how they can bring their talents and their passion to continue to shape Australian politics. Could you please join me in welcoming Rebecca and Niloufar?
Thank you, Professor Gallagher. It's an honour to be here this evening to give the vote of thanks on behalf of the entire cohort from the 2024 Pathway to Politics for Women program. As an alum and current PhD student at the university, it's an incredible opportunity to meet our panellists as fellow alum and distinguished female leaders in South Australian and Australian politics. It's been motivating to listen to the panellists reflect on their inspiring careers, share their experiences, and discuss the future of women in Australian politics. I personally admire the progress you represent and the foundation you provided for ambitious women like us to build upon. It's an exciting time to be entering politics. As the dynamic slowly evolves, communities expect more from their government and their politicians. Equal opportunity and representation are no longer a great privilege. It is our right, and a right that we must not take for granted. And now is not the time to slow down. As we've heard, it's been 130 years since we won the right to vote and run. But are we equally respected? And are we equally judged? I wrote this before I heard the comments tonight. I think the answer is no. Inclusion is about more than just meeting quotas. And while we do see more women today than ever, we must recognise that our job here is not done. I'm passionate about engaging in politics because I want to be part of that real and significant change. I'm ready to push our government on health, education, cost of living, and to represent hard-working mums and caregivers who care deeply about the well-being of our families and offer a distinct perspective. And let me assure you, I am unafraid. Thank you. You've also heard a lot about democracy tonight. If we are living in a great democracy, then South Australians deserve strong candidates from across the political spectrum. We deserve a healthy opposition, and we deserve fierce debate. This is how progress is made. I often think of my favourite quote: "It's not the battles we lose that bother me, it's the ones we don't suit up for." So, on behalf of the University of Adelaide, I would like to thank you all for delivering an insightful and inspiring discussion today. Thank you for suiting up. We truly do stand on the shoulders of giants. It's our pleasure to present our panellists. Senator the Honourable Penny Wong, Senator Sarah Hanson-Young, the Honourable Vicky Chapman, and Commissioner Natasha Stott-Despoja AO with a small gift as a token of appreciation for joining us on campus today. I would also like to extend a sincere thanks to Tori Shepherd for facilitating today's discussion. A brilliant mind. Tori has a brilliant mind and a wonderful way of weaving an invisible string between guests, so thank you. On behalf of the university, I'd like to say to all of you who attended here today, I hope you enjoyed this special Make History Speaker Series event as much as I did.
Thank you so much, Rebecca and Niloufar. That closes our proceedings for this evening. Thank you all so much for joining us. I hope that you agree that it was a great decision to come out on a Wednesday evening. Please get home safely. Thank you so much.